So ein ganz herzliches Willkommen, Exzellenzen, Mitglieder des Parlaments, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer. Herzlich willkommen heute Abend hier im Quartier Zukunft. Wir freuen uns außerordentlich, dass Sie heute Abend hierher gefunden haben, persönlich zu uns. Möglicherweise einer der letzten Veranstaltungen, die wir ad personam hier in Berlin veranstalten können, leider. Vor 2 Jahren hatte uns schon mal dasselbe Schicksal ereilt. Auch hier war die letzte ad personam Veranstaltung, die wir haben durchführen können. Wir begrüßen aber auch alle jene, die am Livestream dabei sind. Und das sind einige, denn einige, und das verstehen wir natürlich, haben es vorgezogen, in diesen Zeiten sich nicht dem Risiko von Corona auszusetzen. Das Thema ist Frauenförderung im weitesten Sinne. Es ist Equality, ein Thema, das uns von Anfang an begleitet. Seit den ersten Tagen ist das eines unserer großen Querschnittsthemen. Und deswegen haben wir auch mit großer Begeisterung das Gender Equality Forum begleitet. Ein Jahr lang mit verschiedenen Veranstaltungen zur Politik, zu Financial Inclusion. Wir haben Entrepreneurs vorgestellt mit der französischen Botschafterin und vieles andere mehr. Heute ziehen wir Bilanz zu diesem Gender Equality Forum und Anja Langenbucher wird uns einiges noch dazu berichten, denn die Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation haben das Gender Equality Forum von Anfang an unterstützt, getragen, mitgestaltet. Sie ist also da die Stimme, die wirklich aus dem Nähkästchen plaudern kann. Wir begrüßen ganz besonders auch Frau Strack-Zimmermann, direkt aus den Verhandlungen, sie muss uns jetzt gleich was verraten, aus den Verhandlungen zur neuen Regierung hier zu uns gekommen und sie ist, ich würde mal sagen, ein wunderbares Rollenmodell für eine starke Frau, abgesehen von allem, was sie sonst geleistet hat. Ole Osenka, ganz very, 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 very warm welcome. She came from Africa to us and she was named the Women of the Year in the energy sector of Africa. And she's one of the 50 most influential people in Africa too. Vera Songwe will us join on the video a little bit later. She is the UN Commissioner for Economics und sie ist jetzt gerade noch mal in einer ganz, ganz wichtigen Sitzung der UN, aber sie kommt. Vera Songwe ist, also manche sagen, sie wird die nächste Präsidentin der Weltbank und wer sie kennt, glaubt das auch, eine unglaublich versierte Ökonomin. Und dann ist es eine ganz besondere Ehre, dass wir unsere First Lady, Elke Büdenbender, heute Abend hier begrüßen dürfen, die hierher gekommen ist, obwohl sie ein bisschen erkältet ist und obwohl, und obwohl sie noch einen transatlantischen Flug heute Nacht vor sich hat, ist sie hierher gekommen und wird zu uns sprechen. Wir beide haben uns schon ausgetauscht, wir 3 haben uns ausgetauscht, dass einer der ersten Veranstaltungen von Global Perspectives war mit Elke Büdenbender und Melinda Gates. In einem kleinen Kreis beim Abendessen haben wir worüber gesprochen? Über Frauen und Gleichberechtigung. Also es ist ein schöner Bogen, der sich auch damit schließt. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir einen Partner heute Abend an unserer Seite haben. Wir machen das hier alles nicht allein, sondern wir machen das zusammen mit der Agentur für Wirtschaft und Entwicklung. Und Caroline Welzel ist die Repräsentantin und sie wird uns heute durch dieses Gespräch führen und durch diesen Abend führen. Und damit gebe ich auch das Wort an dich und wir freuen uns sehr, sehr, dass du heute Abend hier bist. Vielen, vielen Dank.
Very warm welcome to all of you here tonight. It's really, really good to see you here. I think the microphone is on now. Warm welcome to you. My name is Caroline Welzel, and I am here on behalf of the Agency for Business and Economic Development. We are part of the BMZ universe, and just in a nutshell, if you are a business person, if you're running a business and you're seeking advice on investments in developing countries, you can give us a call or drop us an email. We will help you. We're really happy to organize this jointly with GPI here. We have a lot of people joining us virtually. Of course, the welcome is extended to them. Yes, I'm really delighted. Mrs. Ham has already presented our speakers a little bit, and I think you guess already that we have a lot of professional but also personal experience here tonight on the panel. So I really look forward to this discussion. But before we jump into the discussion and we will listen to you, Mrs. Büdenbender, please allow me a couple of technical remarks. Yeah, it's always the section that comes in first at these kind of events. We do take COVID very seriously. So we have taken all, let's say, necessary measures here in the room to prevent whatever. Yeah, so this just to tell you. Secondly, you have noticed that all our speakers tonight are female. This is, yeah, I know. I know. This is a coincidence, of course, just by chance. It does not mean at all that we exclude men from our discussion here. On the contrary, we are really happy if you will join later on with your questions and remarks, either here in the room or online. You can do so via Twitter. Now I have to look on my notes because these addresses are always a bit a challenge. So either you can use @GPI_Germany for your questions, or you can use Agentur Verde and with also the @ And if this is all too complicated, there's also an email address, office@globalperspectives.de, I think. Org. Okay, thank you. Okay. These are, yeah, and then of course we use these Twitter accounts to highlight some of the things here tonight, the discussion. And I would really appreciate if some of you would, look into it, perhaps retweet something and share this experience on social media with us. Okay, enough housekeeping. Mrs. Büdenbender, you have been already introduced, but please let me say how glad, how happy I am to be able to announce you tonight. You are not only the First Lady of the Federal Republic of Germany, you are also a very successful career woman. You have a long experience as a judge in Hanover and in Berlin. And you are also patron of quite a few initiatives that deal with the topic of social equality, educational equality. So I think, you're really in a very good position to give us the scene here tonight, to set the scene, to get us into the mood for the discussion. So the floor is yours, Mrs. Büdenbender.
First, I would like you to ask to your headsets because I give my speech in Deutsch. Okay. Ja, vielen Dank für die schöne Einführung. Dankeschön Ihnen beiden. Exzellenzen, sehr geehrte Frauen, Abgeordnete, sehr geehrte Frau Dr. Hamm, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Women's rights are human rights. Dieser Satz von Hillary Clinton aus dem Jahr 1995 klingt ebenso logisch wie selbstverständlich. Und doch zeigt ein Blick in die Lebenswelt vieler Mädchen und Frauen, dass das leider doch nicht so selbstverständlich ist. Immer noch leben zu viele Mädchen und Frauen in großer Armut. Sie haben keinen Zugang zu Bildung, zu wenig zu essen, kein sauberes Trinkwasser. Sie werden unter Umständen zwangsverheiratet und nicht selten Opfer von fürchterlicher Gewalt. Das war vor der Corona-Pandemie so und das ist nun, oft auch aufgrund des wirtschaftlichen Niedergangs weltweit, bestimmt nicht besser geworden. Wir wissen es, die Pandemie hat vor allem Mädchen und Frauen sehr hart getroffen. Dabei denke ich, dass wir durchaus sagen können, wir sind auf einem guten Weg. Aktionsplattformen wie die von Peking 1995, die UN-Resolution 1325, die Agenda 2030 und das Gender Equality Forum sind alles gute Schritte in eine sehr richtige Richtung. Auch setzen sich mittlerweile viele Organisationen und Initiativen für eine Stärkung der Rechte von Mädchen und Frauen sowie vor allem, was ich für sehr wichtig halte, für einen gleichberechtigten Zugang zu Bildung für alle ein. Und doch stehen wir erneut, so meine ich, vor einem sehr kritischen Moment. Die Pandemie hat viele Bemühungen erschwert, wenn nicht zunichte gemacht und bedeutete für viele Menschen, aber ich sagte es schon, besonders für Mädchen und Frauen doch einen Rückschritt. Ich möchte Ihnen ein konkretes Beispiel nennen. Im Februar des vergangenen Jahres besuchte ich, kurz bevor die Welt dann stillstand, gemeinsam mit UNICEF Nepal. Die Armut, die wir dort sahen, die war wirklich sehr bedrückend. Aber wir haben auch viel Positives gesehen. Wir sprachen mit Mädchen aus einem UNICEF-Projekt, die die ersten weiblichen Familienmitglieder waren, die eine Schule besuchen durften. Diese Mädchen hatten eine Perspektive auf ein selbstbestimmtes Leben, ein Leben, in dem sie einen Beruf ergreifen und ihr eigenes Geld verdienen könnten. Eines, in dem sie sich auch den Mann oder die Frau aussuchen konnten, den oder die sie heiraten wollen. Das Strahlen der Mädchen, dieser Stolz, diese Vorfreude auf dieses Leben und diese Freude in dem gegenwärtigen Leben beeindruckte und berührte uns alle sehr und auch ihre Power. Aber während der Pandemie haben wir vom Ortsbüro UNICEF erfahren, dass auch dort natürlich die Schulen geschlossen wurden. Familienväter kamen zurück aus dem Ausland, auch Familienmütter. Es gab kein Einkommen mehr und die Familien sind sehr tief, noch tiefer in die Armut geglitten. Was das für diese Mädchen nun bedeutet, können wir nur erahnen. Ich hoffe aber sehr, dass ihnen nicht das Los der Zwangsverheiratung droht, sondern dass sie es schaffen, wieder zurück in die Schulen zu gehen. Oder schauen wir auf die Frauen in Indien. 2018 besuchte ich das Land mit meinem Mann und ich traf Frauen, die Opfer von Säureanschlägen oder Brandanschlägen geworden waren, meist begangen von Familienangehörigen oder dem eigenen Mann. Aber auch in Deutschland wird jeden dritten Tag eine Frau von ihrem Partner oder Ex-Partner ermordet. Solche Lebensumstände, die so etwas möglich machen, darf es für Mädchen und Frauen nirgendwo auf der Welt mehr geben. Die Agenda für 2030 für nachhaltige Entwicklung der Vereinten Nationen formuliert 17 Ziele. Sie sollen weltweit die Sicherung einer nachhaltigen Entwicklung auf ökonomischer, sozialer sowie ökologischer Ebene dienen. Alle 193 Mitgliedstaaten der Vereinten Nationen haben sich zu ihnen bekannt und sich verpflichtet, diese Ziele durchzusetzen. Diese Ziele sind gute Werkzeuge, die wir nutzen sollten. Denn das hat die Pandemie auch gezeigt. Die globale Herausforderung, gerade auch in der Pandemie, können wir nur gemeinsam als Staatengemeinschaft angehen und auch nur gemeinsam bewältigen. Gender Equality ist eines von 17 Zielen. Aber ich denke, die anderen 16 Ziele haben grundlegenden Einfluss auf die Erreichung vollständiger Geschlechtergerechtigkeit und müssen daher unbedingt mitgedacht werden, wenn wir daran arbeiten. Die Agenda 2030 soll allen Menschen ein besseres Leben ermöglichen. Wenn aber die Hälfte der Weltbevölkerung Frauen sind, so müssen sie konsequenterweise natürlich unbedingt Teil dieses Prozesses sein, sowohl auf der Ebene der Entscheiderinnen und Entscheider, aber auch auf der Ebene derjenigen, die davon profitieren. Ich bin überzeugt, ohne die gleichberechtigte Beteiligung von Frauen in Politik, Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft wird es uns nicht möglich sein, die SDGs bis 2030 zu erreichen. Das Positive ist, die Zahl der starken Frauen wird mehr und sie werden lauter. Frauen schaffen es immer mehr und immer besser, sich auch international zu vernetzen und so über Ländergrenzen hinweg füreinander einzustehen. Und Frauen sind natürlich nicht nur Opfer. Ich möchte hier aus einer Videobotschaft von Melinda Gates zitieren. When a crisis hits, it's women that hold the world together. Oft sind es Frauen, die die Treiberinnen des Wandels sind. Immer mehr Frauen weltweit treten für ihre Rechte ein. Auch im Kampf gegen die Pandemie stehen sie an vorderster Front. Es sind Frauen, denen bei Friedensverhandlungen und dem Wiederaufbau einer Gesellschaft die Schlüsselpositionen zukommen. Mit der UN-Resolution 1325, die der Sicherheitsrat der Vereinten Nationen vor gut 20 Jahren verabschiedete, wird dieser Tatsache Rechnung getragen und zugleich ist das eine Forderung und Aufforderung. Entschuldigung, ich brauche mal ein Taschentuch. So. Deshalb ist es an der Zeit, meine ich, dass Frauen auch gleichberechtigt an alle Verhandlungstische wichtiger politischer und wirtschaftlicher Entscheidungen kommen. Es gibt großartige Initiativen, international wie national, und ich erwähnte sie schon kurz. Die Aktionsplattform von Peking 1995 führt zu einer bahnbrechenden Agenda zur Beseitigung systemischer Barrieren, die Frauen von einer gleichberechtigten Teilhabe in allen Lebensbereichen abhalten. Viele Länder sind dieser Agenda gefolgt und haben auch Erfolge vorzuweisen. Doch kann keines der Länder bis heute die eingegangenen Pflichten vollständig erfüllen. Das Gender Equality Forum, ein globaler zivilgesellschaftlicher Dialog, nahm das 25-jährige Jubiläum von Peking zum Anlass, um weltweit für die Gleichstellung der Geschlechter zu mobilisieren. Immerhin wurde ein 5-Jahres-Aktionsplan beschlossen und 40 Milliarden Dollar an finanziellen Zusagen wurden generiert, um die vollständige Gleichberechtigung der Geschlechter voranzutreiben und umzusetzen. Meine Damen und Herren, ich bin auch fest davon überzeugt, dass die Durchsetzung der gleichen Teilhabe aller Menschen, aller Frauen und Männer in allen Bereichen auch ganz handfeste wirtschaftliche Vorteile mit sich bringt. In erster Linie natürlich für die einzelne Frau, für den einzelnen Mann, aber auch für die nationalen Ökonomien und internationale Ökonomie. Die Weltwirtschaft insgesamt würde davon profitieren, jetzt zitiere ich, wenn mehr Frauen erwerbstätig wären und besseren Zugang zu Bildung und Krediten hätten. Das stellte Tina Groll schon 2013 unter Berufung auf die Studie des IWF fest. Chancengleichheit ist also auch ein Wirtschaftsfaktor und ein handfester Wettbewerbsvorteil. Der Wirtschaftsstandort Deutschland wäre ohne die Leistung von Frauen nicht so weit vorne. Ich möchte da insbesondere die Frauen aus der früheren DDR erwähnen und auch würdigen, die wirklich die Erwerbstätigkeit von Frauen in den Jahren seit der Wiedervereinigung zur Selbstverständlichkeit gemacht haben. Das kann überhaupt nicht unterschätzt werden, was diese Frauen für Wegbereiterinnen waren. Da bin ich Ihnen unendlich dankbar für. Innovation und Fortschritt in allen Bereichen und auch in der Wirtschaft bedarf der unterschiedlichen Perspektive, der Ideen von Männern und Frauen, von Menschen mit ganz unterschiedlichem Hintergrund. Entscheidungen, an denen auch gerade Frauen beteiligt sind, sind oft die besseren, weil sie umfänglicher sind, mehr Perspektive haben. Und so halten Frauen den Wirtschaftsstandort Deutschland, so meine ich, innovativ und dynamisch. Und trotzdem sind bei uns in den Führungsetagen weiterhin Frauen unterrepräsentiert, bekommen im Schnitt weniger Gehalt und gründen selten eigene Unternehmen oder seltener. Frauen im Wirtschaftsleben zu unterstützen, sie zu ermutigen, sich auch um Führungspositionen zu bewerben, sie in Führungspositionen zu bringen und ihre Leistungen öffentlich sichtbar zu machen, muss ein gesellschaftliches, aber auch ein wirtschaftspolitisches Ziel sein. Und wenn es nicht ohne geht, und dann ging schon mal etwas von selbst, dann brauchen wir doch gesetzlich verankerte Vorgaben, sprich Quoten. Meine Damen und Herren, Sie sehen, das Thema Strong Women, Strong Society oder Strong Economic ist ganz vielseitig. Es spielen sehr viele Faktoren eine Rolle. Weltweit gibt es große Unterschiede hinsichtlich der Situation und der Lebensbedingungen von Mädchen und Frauen. Und doch gilt für alle. Wir Frauen sind nicht das schwache Geschlecht. Wir können alles, was Männer auch können, so wie Männer auch fast alles können, was Frauen können. Es ist an der Zeit, endlich allen Frauen auf dieser Welt gleichberechtigte Teilhabe in allen Bereichen des Lebens zu ermöglichen. Deshalb, ich kann es nicht oft genug sagen, gehören Frauen gleichberechtigt an alle politischen Verhandlungstische und in die Führungsetagen von Wirtschaftsunternehmen. Danke Ihnen, liebe Frau Dr. Hamm, und Ihren Mitstreiterinnen für Ihr Engagement und für diese Veranstaltungsreihe, die das Thema in die Öffentlichkeit bringt. Und ich danke Ihnen allen, die Sie hier teilnehmen und denen, die uns digital zuschauen, für Ihr unermüdliches Engagement für die Sache der Frauen. Wir brauchen starke Netzwerke, und zwar über Ländergrenzen hinweg. Wir müssen die Frauen in unseren Ländern unterstützen. Wir müssen Frauen in allen Teilen der Welt unterstützen. Und wir brauchen weibliche Vorbilder. Sie sind alle solche Vorbilder und sie sind alle starke Netzwerkerinnen. Starke Frauen, starke Wirtschaft. Aber es gilt auch, starke Frauen, starke und vor allem stabile und sichere Welt. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bühnenbender, for these words of introduction. And I think you have given us all the key words that we are going to need tonight to discuss. You've talked about education, about domestic violence, about systemic barriers that hinder women, economic participation as a big topic, and of course, prosperity for everybody actually on this planet if we give more equality to women, if gender equality is finally realized. So thank you very much. Now we will open up the floor a little bit, and I would like to invite my dear panelists here to the floor. Don't be shy, Mrs. Langbucher. Ola, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann. You all have something in common, I think. First of all, you're all female and very successful in what you're doing. And secondly, you all have a professional as well as personal opinion on our topic. So I think this discussion is going to be very interesting. Please allow me to introduce the panelists at this point. We will start with Mrs. Langenbucher. She has been with the World Bank and the IFC, as well as with the European Bank for Reconstruction. But now she's heading the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation here in Europe. And the Gates Foundation, and we've heard a bit about the Gender Equality Forum already, has made the topic of gender equality one of its top priorities. And I think we're going to hear a bit on your work and experience on this field. Ola Osoka, the woman that traveled far to be with us tonight. It's a great pleasure to see you again. We've had the occasion to discuss 2 years ago, I think. That was one of the last meetings before like the shutdown. So it's really good to see you. You are CEO at Daystar Power. Daystar Power is a renewable company, and they operate 200 sites in West Africa. So it's quite big. And I really like the title of African Woman of Solar. It's great. It's really nice. Member of Parliament in Germany for the second time in a row, but also member of the delegation for the negotiations now on behalf of the Liberal Democratic Party in Germany, and former mayor of the city of Düsseldorf. Mrs. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, you bring in experience, I think, from political fields on all levels, and this will really help us, I think, in this discussion. And I can see that Mrs. Vera Songwe is with us. Mrs. Songwe, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Mrs. Songwe, it's so good to have you with us. You're joining us from Addis Ababa tonight, I think, and you just made it perfect timing for our panel discussion. You have been properly introduced already. You are the Secretary General of UNECA, I think, and you are have been working in this top position for 4 years now, but before you've also been with the World Bank and the IFC, so you share some experiences, I think, professional experiences with other panelists here. Okay, so now you know who's with us here tonight for this discussion. We all have a minute now to settle in, to catch our breath, at least I have, because we're going to listen and to watch a small video that we have prepared to get you all in the mood. It's about the Gender Equality Forum that took place in Paris this year, and we would like to thank UN Women for allowing us to show it tonight. So, film up.
Generation equality, which brings us together here, is about change.
Julieta, what would you like to see happen because of generation equality?
There's a lot of things that I have in mind.
Dans nos sociétés, il n'y a pas encore les mécanismes institutionnels efficaces pour que les jeunes puissent intervenir effectivement au niveau des décisions politiques.
We need the tools, we need the mechanisms so girls can act for a more equal, a more sustainable future.
Through bold policy measures and concerted actions.
Are you ready to unite behind the young feminist agenda? Because we now demand real substantive impact.
Invest in education.
Our grant making and work needs to reflect that.
We now have over $40 billion put forward.
We will work to accelerate the scale and ambition of girls and women's empowerment.
J'appelle les hommes à se mobiliser aux côtés des femmes.
Equality within a generation is possible.
This is a feminist generation.
How can we systemically empower women and promote their rights?
In der Politik, in der Wirtschaft, in allen Bereichen der Gesellschaft.
Gender equality strengthens democracy.
For the benefit of all.
Whatever their gender, whomever they love.
Ces combats, ce sont les nôtres et on ne vous lâchera pas la main.
Very impressive. Good statements. Mrs. Langbucher, you have been there. You have participated, and I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has made, along with others, a very big commitment at this conference. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the experience, about the highlights, your key takeaways from this forum.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Yeah, I think this was an impressive video and showed that really the forum that had to be postponed for 1 year because of COVID came really at the right time, because it was while COVID-19 was still really going on globally very badly. And also it reminded us how quickly we can have setbacks, and just in a few months that, you know, some of the progress that we have made towards the SDGs and gender equality were, you know, experiencing extreme setbacks within just a few months. So from that perspective, I think it was a huge success. It was very encouraging to see the world come together and pledge 40 billion, an enormous number. We were very grateful to work together with a number of donors. The foundation itself gave 2.1 billion, was also one of our biggest pledges ever made. So a big moment for the foundation as well. It was great to see President Macron and the French leadership on that. And also the French government as well pledged 250 million and 90 million for UNFPA. So really important instruments that got supported. The European Union pledged in total 40 billion over many years, but also a very strong signal how aligned the European Union has been with this agenda. And we're also, of course, very grateful to the German government that has shown leadership in one of the 6 action coalitions, which was on economic rights. And here we hope, of course, very much that that gets also carried forward with the new government and the G7 presidency to come. So in terms of the achievements, the Gender Equality Forum is certainly one of these platforms that allow multi-stakeholders to come together. We know many of them, and you know, to really encourage discussions, communication, and collaboration between private sector, public sector, civil society, and really a global perspective on a very specific issue. So it was a success. And as I said, we had many important, as you could see in the video, you know, many important dignitaries joining. It was also complicated. It was many stakeholders that were involved in organizing it. It was UN Women, it was the government of France, the government of Mexico. It was complicated, and it was high transaction cost, I should say, to coordinate across 6 action coalitions, all led by different stakeholders with, of course, you know, many views. And so it was like herding cats at some point. I think going forward and looking ahead a little bit for UN Women, this is certainly a very good platform going forward to leverage their work and also to be able to bring some cohesion and good collaboration among these 6 action coalitions, because of course what we want to see is the work being carried forward. And as so often in these platforms, the biggest question mark is how do we follow up? how do we make sure that what we have announced very nicely is now actually being implemented, being put into action. And this is one of our biggest concerns, of course, going forward. How do we ensure that? So going ahead, some of the critical gaps, I think that we still want to see filled as we look ahead is, on the one hand side, we believe that UN Women can certainly drive great coordination, collaboration between these complicated 6 action coalitions, and also good collaboration between private sector, civil society, philanthropies that all have an important role to play on this agenda going forward. I think we do need a good governance structure going forward. We will need to be really clear what the roles of the different UN agencies, the private sector, civil society is going to be going forward. I think that needs improvement and also more clarity. We also should identify really fast a new host government, one that helps us pull together, follow up, and also is really active in the same way the French president has been in the run-up to this, to really bang the drums on resource mobilization, to make sure the advocacy machine is running, and all of these big commitments that were made are actually followed up for the next summit, because some critical voices have, of course, said, well, where are we compared to Beijing? Have we really achieved so much more? And I think, as we've heard already at the address from Ms. Budenbender, yes, some countries and some regions and some areas we have seen progress, in others we haven't. And the last I call out is certainly an accountability mechanism, which we will need, which really needs to make sure we're tracking, we're following up, and we're seeing where progress has been made, because we're only going to improve, of course, if we track that. So all in all, of course, as very often a mixed picture, I do think we should not forget the enormous success of this amount of money that has been pledged. And it was a huge political moment. So as we see that the repercussions, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in the discussion of COVID crisis specifically hitting women much harder across, I say unpaid work is probably one of the biggest issues. And so as we're looking ahead, bringing this work forward, I think we just need to make sure that we're continuing to leverage the political momentum that we had.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Langbucher, for this impression from Paris. Mrs. Songwe, I'm sure you have followed what happened in Paris if you were not participating on the ground. Do you share what Mrs. Langbucher just described, that it is overall a big success in spite of the huge agenda ahead?
Yes, no, thank you. First of all, let me thank Ingrid Ham. I want to single her out because she has been after me saying, I should come. So thank her. Of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Snellfrom Foundation as well for having me here. And thank you and greetings to the panelists as well. Listen, I think every time that the world community comes together to have a conversation, it is the beginning of a success. I think the fact that we could, even convene in Paris amidst COVID means that the world is beginning to open up. But I think also that it could be highly deceptive in many ways. I think, in the last few months, we have seen the G20 meet, we have seen 2 weeks of COP26, we've seen Paris. So there've been a lot of meetings. And so I think one of the words that we use recently a lot is networking. So there's been networking. The question is, how much has that networking moved the agenda? How much has that networking moved the dial? Has that networking allowed for more women to be on panels like this one, where there's all women? We should see more of them, or there's some balance. How much has that networking identified the problems of women in society today and provided good solutions to it? And so my sense is we need to start weighing some of these things. And, the last speaker spoke about accountability. I say, in addition to accountability, we need transparency. One of the things that has clearly, been brought to bear in this crisis has been a huge lack of trust in our institutions, in our organizations, also because there's been a lack of voice. And so I think what we do need to do is reestablish that. I think that we, the women, realize that, we're working 20 times more because we go to work, we come home, we working in society to keep societies together, and we're paid half as much. We don't have the childcare that is needed to ensure that we can be supported as we do different things. The standards are not necessarily always the same for us as we try to access different opportunities in life. In the developing economies from which I come from, we see that the insurance system does not allow for women in particular to be sufficiently resilient. In the many jobs that they do, we have a huge 70% of our economy is informal and or agrarian, and those are mostly women. And we don't yet have the kinds of structures that are needed to ensure that those women who are very resilient have the right infrastructure and insurance systems so that when a crisis like this hits, they don't fall further down into poverty. The analysis that the Economic Commission for Africa has done has shown that when women fall into poverty, they fall much deeper and they stay for much longer. This means that it impacts 2 or 3 generations down the road because the kids don't go to school and the kids get married early. And so I think one of the things that Paris has done is at least highlight some of the issues. I think we need to be careful as well with resource pledges, because, and then this is where the conversation around trust becomes important as well. We hear a lot of numbers being thrown around. A lot of it is not additional. And particularly in this point in time, we need additionality because, we've lost so much income, the worst contraction in 50 years in Africa. And so we need new, fresh resources, not addition, not just replacing or shuffling around the deck of what exists already. And I think that kind of transparency and accountability will be important as we leave all these big conferences, G20, Paris, and COP, to see what is really additional, what is new resources on the table. Can somebody give us that? And then begin to tell us where those resources will go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Songe. Thank you so much. We will talk about resources and finance a little bit, I think, also tonight. But before we do so, I would like to narrow the lens a little bit and perhaps zoom into the 2 countries we have represented here, or the 2 regions at the table. Mrs. Osoka, we've heard tonight that some places are more equal than others around the world. What is your perception in West Africa? You're based in Accra, but you travel a lot, you see a lot. How would you describe the situation there currently for women and for girls? And perhaps what has changed for better or worse lately?
Thank you, Carolyn. First, let me thank the organizers of this event for inviting me here. And I think it's always helpful to start with context. So on the continent, there are currently 1.3 billion people. 50% of that number are female. If you look at annual growth, every year it's around 2.7% of an increase in population. To put that in perspective, if you're looking at Germany, for example, it means every 2.5 years, the equivalent of Germany is being added to the population on the continent. Yeah? So currently 1.3 billion, half of that female, 2.7% annual growth rate. Now, if we zoom into the female population, 80% of women are in vulnerable employment. So that means effectively, either they're operating in the informal sector or they're self-employed, so that when incidences like COVID happen or climate disruption, they're out of jobs. And being out of jobs means, cementing poverty, but if you look at the daily implication of that, it really means no income and actually also no food today for me, for my family, if I fall in that bracket. Now, it's interesting because if you look at how women spend money, the data coming from Africa is that if you invest in a woman, or if you give women finances, 90% of that is reinvested in the community, right? So if I look at my direct experience, I'm Nigerian, in case you couldn't tell. My direct experience, so many women in my community, they educated, they paid for schools for people they didn't know, just because there was a communal spirit. So 90% of their funds goes to community. So there's a very clear trickle-down effect, multiplier effect for empowering women. And what we've seen, as our panelists have alluded to, is with the pandemic, there's been a disproportionate effect on women. With that 80% of people being thrown into unemployment or insecurity from the health perspective, from a finance perspective, but also actually women in paid formal employment not having the mechanisms to cope. Practical example, I'm sure we all experience Zoom fatigue. Now think about how many times you were on a call that involved a woman and in the background you heard mama, yeah? I never heard papa. So the question then is, yeah, I'm like, where's your daddy? Where is your daddy in all of this? So how can we create a culture where there is a principle of co-parenting? How can we create work environments that are flexible, but actually give equality in the sense that the men should also take care of the children? Otherwise, what we see and have seen happening in the last few months is that women have to leave employment. And there again is that multiplier effect to the communities. So yes, there have been successes, but we have really a long way to go. And we need to make very hard and very fast decisions in terms of closing the gaps.
Yes, and I can really underline what you said about the Zoom conferences or the other ones, not to, point out any platform here, that usually the kids are there when the moms are trying to work. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, Germany, of course, is a very different place. We have, I think, accomplished a lot here for women in the past years, but I think we also have some work still ahead of us. Now, I noticed that Mrs. Langenbucher kind of looked your way when she talked about a good new framework for the next round of a gender equality forum, a strong host country, possibly Germany. Do you think that this issue of gender equality will be very high on the agenda in the coming years? I know we are not going to go deep into politics tonight, in German politics, but do you see this as a priority ahead in Germany?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. If it's okay, I change in German. It's such an interesting topic. I feel more comfortable. Ich glaube, dass Deutschland den Anspruch hat oder glaubt, weiter zu sein als andere. Ich sehe das kritisch. Es wurde gerade gesagt, dass die Pandemie uns zurückgeworfen hat, gerade in Zeiten des Lockdowns, wo die Frauen zu Hause waren, weil sie auch oft in der Partnerschaft einen geringeren Verdienst hatten, sich um die Kinder kümmern mussten, gerade in dem Moment, wo die Kinder nicht in die Schule konnten, was bei Lichte betrachtet die größte Katastrophe war. Und das wird uns auch noch lange belasten. Das war der größte Fehler, wenn man jetzt schon dorthin schaut. Das heißt, Deutschland glaubt immer weiter zu sein. Ich bezweifle das. Und das hat sehr viele Gründe. Und wenn Sie mir erlauben, gehe ich mal wirklich an den Anfang von allem, nämlich in die Familien. Und Frauen sind so selbstbewusst, wie sie in der Familie auch erzogen werden. Und dazu gehören nicht nur Mamis, dazu gehören Väter, dazu gehören Vorbilder, dazu gehören Geschwister. Und das Selbstverständnis, ich nehme immer dieses eine Beispiel, das ich bei jungen Frauen oft erlebe, die ich ermutige, politisch zu sein. Nicht um in den Bundestag zu kommen und immer nur das ganz große Rad, sondern sich zu engagieren. Und oft scheitert es daran, dass sie sagen, ich habe einen Job, den möchte ich sehr gut machen. Möglicherweise habe ich eine Familie, das möchte ich toll machen. Jetzt noch eine politische Aufgabe, die ich auch gern toll machen würde. Eigentlich ist mir das zu viel, erstens. Zweitens möchte ich auch immer noch gut aussehen, weil irgendwann pfeift man aus dem letzten Loch. Wie immer man das jetzt übersetzt, aus dem letzten Loch pfeifen. Und das große Problem ist in diesem Kontext, dass Frauen sehr häufig, und ich glaube, es gehört auch ein Stück Selbstkritik dazu, sich erstens dieser Konkurrenz nicht aussetzen wollen. Mir sagen oft Frauen, ich habe einfach keine Lust, mich mit dem einen oder anderen Kollegen auseinanderzusetzen, der breitbeinig durch die Republik läuft und es stresst mich, ich habe keine Lust dazu. Aber was auch gerade in den einführenden Worten gesagt worden ist, warum, und ich muss direkt sagen, ich habe einen tollen Mann, ich hatte einen tollen Vater, Brüder, Söhne, also ich bin umringt von tollen Typen. Warum sollen Männer etwas abgeben von dem, was sie über Jahrhunderte sich erarbeitet haben? Deswegen können wir nicht darauf warten, dass man es uns gibt, sondern wir müssen uns nehmen. Das ist der eine Teil und der fängt zu Hause an, der fängt im kommunalpolitischen Bereich an, der geht durch die Firmen, durch. Das ist nicht immer bequem, aber das gehört zur Wahrheit dazu. Und dann gibt es noch einen zweiten Punkt. Und das sagten Sie gerade, Networking. Ich glaube, dass wir Frauen noch weit davon entfernt sind, wirkliche Netzwerker zu sein. Es ist auf dem High-Level, was Sie gerade sagten, wo auch sich ein Präsident auch schmückt damit. Tolle Frauen, tolle Aussagen und dann geht er wieder nach Hause. Ich weiß nicht, was dann ist. Und diese Situation, dass man, wenn man etwas selber erreicht hat als Frau, die Kraft hat, sich weiter mit Frauen zu netzwerken. Eigentlich ist Deutschland progressiv. Wir haben eine Kanzlerin seit 16 Jahren. Wir hatten und haben eine Verteidigungsministerin, eigentlich ein Bereich, was man für gewöhnlich eher Männern zumutet. Das heißt, wir haben sehr starke Frauen auch in der Politik und trotzdem funktioniert das Netzwerken, finde ich, nicht so, wie es sein sollte. Also Selbstkritik dahingehend, wir müssen uns auch etwas zutrauen, wir müssen uns auch etwas zumuten und wir müssen eben auch netzwerken und das können Männer einfach besser. Ich weiß nicht, ob das die Evolution war, aber ich habe neulich in einer Runde junger Frauen gesagt, jetzt stellt euch mal vor, ihr seid alles Enten und schwimmt auf einem Teich und plötzlich kommt ein schöner Erpel um die Ecke. Und was passiert dann? Dann werden die Federn geputzt und dann ist das Kollektiv der Frauen sehr schnell stößt an Grenzen. Wir haben natürlich alle gesagt, naja, ein bisschen ist da was dran. Aber was ich damit sagen will, ist, wenn wir nicht lernen, uns gegenseitig zu unterstützen, und will jetzt nicht über Quote sprechen, weil darüber kann man sehr lange diskutieren, aber dann werden wir es weiter schwer haben. Erlauben Sie mir noch einen letzten Satz. Ich mache Verteidigungspolitik und ich sehe die Krisen in dieser Welt. Wir sprachen gerade von Westafrika. Die Krisen dieser Welt werden wir nur lösen können, wenn wir die Frauen an unserer Seite haben, wenn wir Erziehung, also Education, Bildung weiter vermitteln. Wir werden die Überbevölkerung der Erde, jetzt mache ich mal den ganz großen Bogen, die Überbevölkerung der Erde ist das große Problem unseres Jahrhunderts. Und das werden wir nur in den Griff bekommen, wobei das eigentlich schon zu spät ist, wenn wir gemeinsam mit den Frauen, die natürlich auch wirken müssen in ihre Familien, mit ihren Ehemännern, bilden, ausbilden und damit haben Sie das Thema Geburtenkontrolle. Und wenn wir das nicht machen, dann werden wir nicht nur ein großes Problem haben, aber wir sollten kritisch als Deutsche bei uns zu Hause mal anfangen, bevor wir glauben, unsere Weisheit in die Welt hinaustragen zu wollen. Ich glaube, es gibt Länder, die sind viel weiter, als wir vermuten.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, for this engaged statement. Mrs. Songwer, I'm not sure if you've been able to follow it, if you've had, you have had translation, great. Because I would like to ask you, because we are here now on a bit of a personal note also on observations we make. And UNECA has celebrated its 60th birthday, I think, just recently. But you're the first female in this top position to lead the organizations. Do you think this is just by accident? Are you the first one of many to follow? What do you see, let's say, in your professional life around you?
No, thank you, thank you. I don't think it's by accident. I think, well, I applied for the job and I got, I did the interviews and I got selected out of a group of, I think, very distinguished women who also applied and men who applied for it. And so my sense is that there was merit to it. I also think that we had a Secretary General who has and I heard, I don't like quotas. I'm ambivalent about quotas. I think if you don't measure things, you cannot determine progress. So you do need to measure. And the Secretary General has a mandate for 50% gender equality across the institution. And so I think working at that is quite a task. And I'll give you an example. So I have said, okay, we have a mandate as well in the institution. We were at maybe 22% women in leadership positions or women across the board. And so we started working at how can we get more females into the institution. And immediately, you know, people say, oh, but are they very good? Oh, they may not be good enough. And, you know, so you get those kinds of insinuations in the corridor. And I think as a female leader of the institution, I have the I suppose, authority, and maybe because of my experience, to say, show me a woman that's not good enough. And if you show me a woman that's not good enough, make sure you show me that, you tell me that every man is better, right? Because it's not enough to show me the woman is not good enough. You have to show me the woman that is, the man that is always better. And I think we do need to start having those discussions, right? Is to say that. And so my sense is, I think we do need some numbers in these things to be able to say, you know, there is a number that we're getting to. I'm happy to say that we're almost at 42% now. So we've almost doubled the female intake into the institution. And I believe it's not just having a woman at the top. We actually have to have women across the system, because you need a bench, you know, because if tomorrow I leave and I haven't built that bench, then I would have gone and there would be nobody else left. And then we'll fall back to where we were. But if we can, you know, have 50% at every level of the institution, it becomes much better. And so I think that's the first thing. I think as was said, you know, nobody's just going to sort of move away and give you the space because you're a woman, right? So you have to take the space, you have to claim the space. And I'm a Black woman, if you haven't noticed. And so, you know, as a Black woman, not only do you have to sort of take the space as a woman, you have to take the space as a Black person, you have to take the space, blah, 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 you know? So there is a lot of spaces that need to be taken. And it means that we get judged, all of us, a little bit more. It's harder, you know, as you know, the anecdotes hold. If you're upset, then they say, oh my God, she's screaming and she has a high temper. And if a man screams, they say he is a leader. And so, you know, there's all those different things you have to play with and play with them carefully. But I believe that women bring, you know, in this COVID period in particular, a kind of empathy that you do not see generally, right? I have staff who've lost family and, you know, rest their souls. I have staff who are about to have kids, and I was laughing the other day. I said, you know, only a woman boss can let you go off and have your kid for 3-4 months and not even worry, and you know, and don't apologize. But I think there is something to it today that allows for taking away the stress. And I think the soft power that women bring to institutions, and we've seen this we've seen that corporate boards that have women on them have a net benefit and actually do much better. We've seen that businesses that have women leaders do better. There is, of course, a conversation around countries that had women leaders did well in COVID. So I think we have a series of sort of evidence-based statistics that can tell us where we want to go and how we want to get there. Now, I totally agree with a female support system. But you see, the problem is that as a woman, immediately I'm done from work, I'm rushing to take care of the kids. The guy, when he's done from work, he's going to have a baby. And so if we don't find, you know, so developing those networks out of work can become quite difficult. And so again, as women leaders, we have to set the example. We have to support those kinds of networks within the institution. We have to create spaces where those networks can develop. But the networks will not develop if there is, you know, 1 or 2 women everywhere. You need to have critical mass so that the women feel empowered when they talk with each other. If you have 1 or 2, then they're always afraid to talk to each other. And they're trying to go and stand with the guys, right? I used to do that, you know, when I was only the, you know, the only woman on my floor. I would go talk to the guys. If there were 2 of us, then we all try to talk to the guys. When there's 7 of us, then we talk to each other. So I think, again, that there is strength in numbers. And so we do need to make sure that we bring numbers to this game, bring more women in. And they don't, you know, we need to lift them. We need to make sure, as you know, there's the study that we all know about, which is the study where if there is a higher job, a woman says, oh, I'm not good enough, I don't apply. And the guy who is certainly not good enough applies, and he gets it because he believes that he can get it, he applies. And the woman who is deserving of the job does not apply. And I think we do need to work with women coming up. I need to work with myself. There's jobs I look at and I say, oh my God, I can't apply for it. And everybody is saying, you know, you should go for it. I think we're all struggling with that. And we just need to, again, I totally agree with this networking. We need to network with each other. We need to pull each other up and support each other once we get up there. I think it's also quite important.
Yeah, I think bringing numbers to the game is a very good statement, but how to do it, you know, how to get there. We've heard that there's, let's say, shared responsibilities on different levels and with the various actors in society. And I would like to look at this a little bit and see, you know, who is going to do what in the future, actually, to get us there. For the Gates Foundation, Mrs. Langenbucher. You have made this contribution in Paris, and you have made the topic of gender equality one of the foundation's priorities just recently. What are the top, let's say, actions that you will contribute, the fields that you will work on in the next years?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe it is important, I think, to acknowledge first that what we said at the panel, of course, that the different issues are very different across the globe. And, you know, in some contexts and in some circumstances, we're talking about very basic access to healthcare, access to education, access to primary healthcare, where we are talking about women in leadership and women in politics in other contexts. I think we should acknowledge that. And especially also when we've seen, you know, throwbacks during COVID, where we had a huge surge in maternal deaths, huge surge in unplanned pregnancies. And, you know, these are all circumstances that I think have been different across the globe. With regards to our own program, I think we have focused on women and girls and put gender sort of in the middle and at the core of our programs for some time. But of course, this has now been also turned into a special program within the foundation. I'm not saying anything new, but what we're trying to do, as so many, is we're really focusing on the structural barriers. And we are also focusing very much on data, which is, I think, something that the foundation is of course known for and does probably with more thoroughness than some others, because we're always trying to understand the problem from a data perspective first, bring numbers to it, and then try to understand how can we build coalitions and drive towards the biggest impact. Structural barriers for women and girls are, of course, around access to education, access to childcare, access to bank accounts, land ownership rights, very basic things very often across. And maybe one where we have now evolved most in is what we frame, so to say, as economic empowerment. And here we're really thinking about, on the one hand side, of course, access to education, but the other is also when women gain money, when they have economic gains, it needs to be made sure that they have a bank account, they have a place to put their money, they have a place to control the money. Cash has to directly go to them. They have to be able to acquire rights, land, purchase. And at the same time, where we put digital financial inclusion then at the heart of some of the programs that we put forward, because we do think here is really an ability and opportunity to drive that on an accelerated path, because it allows us to really give women direct access to cash and bank accounts in almost like a short circuit that. So this is something where we're really focusing on. We're looking at, of course, at all our programs, from global health to nutrition to especially agriculture, where most of the smallholder farmers across, especially, of course, the continent of Africa, are women, as we've heard. Nutrition, I mean, this is, of course, at the front of center of any family. So all of these programs, we're really trying to instill a gender focus, because in most programs, the impact is actually much higher if we do have a women's focus. Financial services is another one. As I said before, we had 2 years ago, Melinda Gates was publishing a report at the French presidency of the G7 on digital inclusion with a gender focus, where we demonstrated, again, looking back at data, very strongly what impact you can have if women have direct access to bank accounts. So I'm repeating myself, but this is really one of the core issues and should stand at the very beginning of economic empowerment. With the gender program, and we've put a gender president in place at the end of last year. So this was, of course, an exciting moment for the foundation. And here we are focusing on some of still, I would say, a learning agenda, where we're trying to figure out, look at the data, understand where the gaps is, and also understand where our role is and should be, because we believe that we should only intervene in areas where we can have a catalytic impact and where we can really change things. So we are at the moment in the middle of trying to really pin down this agenda, but it's already clear that economic empowerment, women in leadership, driving more women into political, in law, in economics, but also in health, in research is one of the agenda that will be very strong.
Thank you very much. We've looked now at this level of a large foundation and the work that's going to be happening there. When we look at the national level, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, what do you see as the way forward here? I mean, legislation, I assume you're not a big fan of it, but perhaps there is sometimes no way around it if you want to achieve something, some major changes. Do we need more voluntary initiatives in Germany? What would you see as an important, let's say, contribution in the next years here?
Also wir sind ja ein Land, was ein wunderbares Grundgesetz haben. Und Sie haben natürlich recht, die Unterschiede, über die wir reden, sind so gigantisch, weil wir eben auch in der Welt Gegenden haben, da ist die Diskussion, die wir jetzt führen, nicht das Wichtigste. Aber weil Sie mich fragen, ich glaube, ja, ein Volontärprogramm, Sie sagten es gerade, dieses Empowern ist auch bei jungen Frauen erforderlich, von denen man annimmt, dass sie aufgrund ihrer Bildung und Ausbildung das eigentlich gar nicht mehr nötig hätten. Die Erfahrung mache ich. Wir haben ja in Deutschland, wenn Sie die Abschlüsse nehmen, also Schulabschlüsse, Abitur, Studium, haben im Schnitt die Frauen, da haben wir mehr Abschlüsse, die Frauen machen und die deutlich besser im Durchschnitt im Vergleich zu den Männern. Das hat viele Gründe. Manche jungen Männer starten auch später durch. Aber eigentlich ist der Anfang gut. Und dann kommt dieser Augenblick, wo ein Riss entsteht. Das hat unterschiedliche Gründe. Das ist auf der einen Seite natürlich, wenn man eine Familie gründet. Sie sagte es gerade, die Kinder rufen in der Regel Mama. Das ist, it's okay, but it's the truth. Ja. Also, dass dann offensichtlich ein Gap entsteht, dann natürlich in den Berufen, dass man also Frauen auch die Chance gibt, mit Familie ihren Weg zu gehen. Und ich glaube, zu volontieren, Angebote zu machen, wäre eine große Hilfe. Das wird auch unsere Aufgabe sein, jungen Frauen Mut zu machen. Aber, und das ist in Deutschland auch so, wir haben eine große Kluft zwischen denen, die aus den Familien kommen, aus gebildeten Familien und aus den Familien, wo ein großer Nachholbedarf ist. Und dieser Riss ist durch Covid, durch die Pandemie deutlich größer geworden. Es fängt bei kleinen Mädchen an und das geht jetzt rauf. Das heißt, dieses Gap wieder zu schließen, wird eine Aufgabe sein. Aber ich glaube, Empowerment-Programme, losgelöst von Familie, losgelöst vom Schulabschluss, wird wesentlich sein. Und den Druck, wir haben einen Arbeitnehmermarkt, den Druck auf Firmen aufzubauen, dass ein modernes Unternehmen ein großes Interesse haben muss, auch im Board, Frauen und Männer auf gleicher Augenhöhe zu haben. Denn ich weiß von jungen Frauen, gut ausgebildeten, die schauen sich genau an, zu welchem Unternehmen sie gehen. Und wenn das da nicht gewährleistet ist, wenn im Board nur Männer sitzen, sagen, was ist in dem Unternehmen los? Also ich glaube, der Druck kann auch aus der Menge heraus, also wer heute ein modernes Unternehmen führt, der muss wissen, wenn Männer und Frauen zusammenarbeiten, das ist nicht nur objektiv besser, es funktioniert einfach auch besser. Weil auch die Tonalität, auch die Sprache verändert sich. Wenn Männer alleine zusammen sind, ist es etwas anderes. Wenn nur eine Frau mit am Tisch sitzt, bricht das Macho-Gehabe oft in sich zusammen. Ich erlaube Widerspruch an der Stelle. Hier sind ja auch sehr nette Herren.
Zum Widerspruch kommen wir gleich. I would like to stick to the panel for one perhaps last contribution, then we will open up the floor, so be prepared. Mrs. Osoka, the national level, we've heard a bit now from Germany. What would you think are the major perhaps changes that now need to happen in your environment? Concrete things that you think should be done, let's say by the Gates Foundation, by large multilateral organizations, by bilateral donors, by your government that is in place? Perhaps you have a few wishes on your list.
Sure. I'm trying to make this actionable and concrete
Please
as possible. So it's not wishful thinking.
We have people here from BMZ listening, for instance, from Parliament. So go ahead.
Super. I think in the first place, it's very important to emphasize personal responsibility. So if we look at all the people in the room on the panel, we have a lot of privilege and we're influential. So in the first place, we need to be super intentional around how we're using that for ourselves, but for those that are coming behind us. If we go up a step further to businesses, right? There is an ethical, there's a logical, there's a business and economic imperative for diversity and gender inclusion. How do we as businesses make sure that we're mindful of the kind of environments we create with our policies for hiring? I work in renewables, a male-dominated area. When we first put out job descriptions for roles, there were never any women. We could have sat on our hands and said, oh, there are no women, c'est la vie, or we could have, and which is what we did. We went to universities, we painted a picture of this is what your life could be. This is who you could be. And now we have 45% female participation. So there's a responsibility on us and our businesses to do more. If I look at a national level, I think we all agree that there's a different context because different countries are dealing with different problems. But I think there's a fundamental shift required in ideology because culturally, in many countries, there is still, I think it comes from maybe when men will go hunting, but there's still this uncomfortable sense that women are incapable. So if a leader of a nation is on a public platform and he's suggesting that the woman's place is in the kitchen, it tells you the extent of the rot and the gap, right? So in terms of what can be done, I think the Gates Foundation and institutions like the Gates Foundation, I'm smiling, as well as the government. If we look at Germany, Germany is one of the largest donors of aid to Africa in Europe. And access to finance is leverage. So I wonder, just as we have seen being done for climate change, how can we leverage that to make sure we're seeing the results that we want? So if, for instance, we all agree that the exclusion of women leads to is not beneficial for the economy. And ultimately, we're seeing literally people choose possible death to enter boats to come to Europe. We need to create countries that are stable enough for them to stay there. So I wonder, to what degree can you leverage the finance you have going to Africa to make sure there are conditionalities around fairness, around participation? I know it's difficult and politics is difficult, but you're super capable. To the Gates Foundation, fantastic work you're doing, right? But I wonder, how can we as part of, or how can you as part of the grant process create conditioned precedents? So if, for instance, this is financing you want to access, let's see your diversity ratio. Let's see perhaps, in case it's difficult for you right now, how we can create a clear path towards seeing the diversity and inclusion we need. But I think if we look at the reality on ground, if we're not seeing the results that we need to take a step back and rethink beyond the commitments, beyond the body language, how can we see clear action? And we all have a role to play in that.
Thank you very much. As promised, I will open up the floor. And my first question here is coming from our Twitter or email or something track. So it works, apparently, I'm glad. And I would like to address this question to you, Mrs. Songwe, because it is the missing link here still is the role of multilateralism and organizations of the UN and how they can play a role. But I would like to link this to a concrete question that is coming from the embassy of Burkina Faso to us. And they're asking, what can organizations from like yours, like the UN ones, actually do now in this COVID context to improve the lives of women and girls in a country that has experienced severe setbacks in gender equality recently?
Thank you. I think three things. The first one, again, is data, and it was mentioned, is getting a sense of where are the women that are in danger, where are the women that are that need support. And I think once we have those buckets, And we've done a lot of work. The Economic Commission for Africa puts out something called the Gender Index, which gives you a sense of what countries are doing and how well they've done since Beijing, and we publish it every 2 years. And across sectors, agriculture, the legal community, which is particularly important, and then business. And so getting data, and the second thing is, today we have only 17% of the whole continent that has access to any kind of sort of social protection programs. And so we do need to then look at what kinds of social protection programs we have, and how can we then target those social protection programs to areas where women will benefit, or where women have the access. And you know, you have countries, Burkina Faso could learn from that. In Senegal, for example, we have a program called the Bourse Familiale, where, you know, there's sort of a basic income is given to all the poor families to lift them out of poverty. You have in Kenya using, and this is something we haven't talked about enough, is the power of ICT in connecting women to resources and access and financialization of the women, of the female economy. Those are some things that we could do. But finally is the resources. And we do need, and that's where the multilateral institutions, mine, the IFC, the United Nations, BMZ and others can come together. And I think the idea of saying, let's measure, you know, what portion of our resources as a donor community go to gender targeted interventions. And I think if we started doing that, but if the countries also started doing that in a way that was more transparent, then I think we will have the beginnings of a solution that works for all. So you need transparency on both sides of that transfer of resources, because most of the time still the resources are transferred into the hands of guys. And so then they have to design these programs. If we don't make them sufficiently transparent, it gets very difficult. And that's where the Kenya program is really, really, I think, stellar. And we do need to understand that. It goes through providing the kind of infrastructure that Kenya has, ICT. Only 24% of the women on the continent have access to a bank account. Of that, even less have access to an internet connectivity platform. If we can give them those kinds of platforms, then it's easy to get programs in place that go directly from sort of the fund into their pockets, into their bank accounts. And I think these are some of the things that we can try to start doing in the African economies, learning from the examples that we already have here on the continent that have been quite successful.
Thank you for these concrete examples and even best practices, Mrs. Songwe. I'm looking around now here in the room. I'm sure there are some informed questions or remarks. And I think now is the time. If you want to ask a question, to raise your hand. Don't be shy, because otherwise I will just carry on and you have to listen to it. Could you please say your name and to whom you would like to address the question?
My name is Dorothy Schneider. I don't know, maybe it's to all, it's just a general question. It's if we talk about multilateralism and international organizations talking about this, it's all very abstract. And from my experience there, especially men in power, generally agree very much with the idea of gender equality and want to improve the situation. But then when it comes to the decision, to the questions like, oh, I have to fill this post, they don't even have an idea about a woman, but talk about the 5 men they met last week or so. And so I was wondering, how do we get really ownership to these people who make decisions so that they think about women, who they can fill posts with, and then actually make on every level a change for gender equality?
Thank you very much. So I think this could be a question for who wants to answer it. Otherwise, I will just appoint somebody. So how can we help men, mostly men, to make better decisions when it comes to filling important posts, finding the right person for the job? Mrs. Langbucher, what would you say?
Yeah, like Ms. Songwe, I am also ambivalent on quota, but I do think that it's a question of throwing them in the mix, and you probably have to force throwing them in the mix. We at the Gates Foundation, we do now have, very explicit to your point, we're trying to have more diversity in the partners we work with. We certainly have a much more diversity focused recruitment program. We are very intentional about the candidates for any position that we're filling. And this is just one example, but I do think that unless you are forcing the choices and the selection to be broader, you're not, you're potentially just, you're not bringing up good candidates that could be there. So I think there has to be a forcing mechanism, and probably that forcing mechanism, as so often, when you have a monopoly in a market and you're trying to bring a new competitor, you kind of have to break with subsidies. And so I think that is one of these examples where you probably have to do this. And then hopefully we get to a place where it becomes more natural and you are empowering and bringing up more women that are also learning from each other. And I think what is missing is role models. I still think role models are missing, probably globally. I would also say that even in Germany, the role models positively thinking about working women is still not so sure. So I think that's another one that I think is really missing.
Yes, of course. Make it short because we have more questions that have just come up.
Sure, absolutely. And I think something that comes before that, which is part of why this event is helpful, is making in people's subconscious these sort of conversations relevant. So if in that scenario, those 5 men, perhaps if on LinkedIn today, they had seen this event, they had seen a picture of output of women in business, their decision process is different because in their subconscious, they've just seen the communication, they've just seen the output of women in industry. And so it's in their interest to then make an informed and better and broader decision.
So I think your question has been the icebreaker. And we have a few more here from the audience.
Yes, hello. My name is André Groß. I'm with Deutsche Messe AG. I'm based here in Berlin. And so I have several remarks or even a question. So first of all, my idea is that only diverse teams can be successful. So this is just my idea. How do I work? But it's not about me today. I have a little bit something to say about no role models here in Germany, or not enough role models, female role models. I attended this summer a very nice conference here in Berlin called Wunder Nova, hosted and organized by Angela Di Giacomo, and Ms. Büdenbender was there as well, by the way, with a keynote. So what about 100 female leaders gathered here in Berlin in summer, and all of them were role models, by the way. So I don't agree that we don't have enough role models. Maybe they are not seen too much or something like this, so we have to work on this. And now I have a question. I switch into German, so Frau Strack-Zimmermann. Die Frage geht nämlich an Sie. Sie haben vorhin auch gesagt, dass wir in Deutschland natürlich noch sehr viel zu tun haben in der Frage der Gleichberechtigung. Und eine Frage bewegt mich da immer wieder. Ich weiß, dass Sie in einem früheren Leben auch in einem Aufsichtsrat von einem kommunalen Unternehmen waren, in Düsseldorf, sehr nahe sozusagen zu meinem Arbeitsbereich. Messe. Und was mich dort immer wieder umtreibt, ist, warum schaffen wir es nicht, selbst in kommunalen Unternehmen dafür zu sorgen, dass Frauen, wenn Vorstandsposten, Geschäftsführerposten ausgeschrieben werden, dass dann auch Frauen auf diese Posten gelangen. Ich bin jetzt seit 20 Jahren im Messewesen. Ich könnte Ihnen jetzt runterbeten, von ungefähr 50 Messegesellschaften in Deutschland, würde ich sagen, gibt es maximal 2 Frauen als Geschäftsführerinnen, davon eine in Karlsruhe. Und es gab eine hier in Berlin, die gibt es nicht mehr. Es gab eine in Köln, die gibt es nicht mehr. Und immer wenn Vorstandsposten, Geschäftsführerposten ausgeschrieben werden, kommen dort keine Frauen hin. Warum?
Frau Strack-Zimmermann,
ja, das
warum?
ist eine spannende Frage. Die gibt es, die Frauen. Ich gebe Ihnen mal 2 Antworten. Ich war in der Tat im Board von der Messe Düsseldorf sehr lange und da war das sehr männlich dominiert. Das kann man so sagen. Ich nenne Ihnen mal ein Beispiel, was, finde ich, sehr viel aussagt. Die Messe Düsseldorf ist sehr, sehr, sehr erfolgreich. Wir sprechen jetzt mal vor Covid. Sehr, sehr erfolgreich. Und da gibt es die größte Bootmesse der Welt, die öffentlich, also eine Publikumsmesse ist. Und die wurde eröffnet, Boot, waren ein paar stramme Kapitäne. Und auf der Bühne standen 5 Frauen in kurzen Höschen, die zu einem militärisch nicht, aber seemännische Musik auf die Bühne marschierten. Und ich habe mir das angeguckt und habe damals dem Vorstandsvorsitzenden gesagt, das war das letzte Mal, dass Sie das machen. Das ist ein No-Go. Was sind das eigentlich für Bilder, die wir hier vermitteln? Ich muss dazu sagen, ich fahre mit Leidenschaft Motorrad, aber ich fahre Motorrad. Ich hänge nicht lassiv auf dem Tank. Das wurde dann auch beendet. Und da habe ich mir gedacht, da ist noch ganz viel nachzuholen. Das ist die eine Seite, weil man hat einen Störfaktor, das kennen Sie, wenn Sie heute Bilder sehen. Und da steht der Innenminister und er zählt seine 10 Staatssekretäre vor. Ich muss nicht gendern, weil im Innenministerium gibt es keine Staatssekretärin, wo man denkt, okay, das sind bestimmt alles Fachleute. Ich will denen gar nicht zu nahe treten, aber finde den Fehler. Das ist die eine Seite, Sie haben recht. Aber es gibt noch eine andere und das ist eine böse Wahrheit. Ich kenne sehr viele Frauen, die könnten das intellektuell. Und wenn ich jetzt sage, es gibt viele Frauen, die bis zu einem bestimmten Punkt das wollen und dann kommt der Augenblick, wo sie dann reflektieren, will ich das wirklich? Will ich 24 Stunden, 7 Tage die Woche präsent sein? Möchte ich das? Will ich nicht doch dieses berühmte Life-Work-Balance haben? Das heißt, diese gläserne Decke, von der oft gesprochen wird, die gibt es, aber die können Frauen durchbrechen, aber dann müssen sie es auch wollen. Wenn sie das Ziel im Auge haben, dann müssen sie es auch im Auge haben. Und dann guckt man nicht ein bisschen rechts, ein bisschen links. Ich glaube deswegen, es hat 2 Seiten. Das, was ich vorhin sagte, warum sollen Männer das teilen? Why? Und die Frauen müssen wollen. Und den Männern muss heute klar sein, Unternehmen, wo keine Frau im Aufsichtsrat bzw. im Vorstand ist, da ist irgendwas, läuft da schief. Sie haben das Thema aufgeworfen. Ich wünsche Ihnen viel Erfolg und ich hoffe, Sie haben genug Kolleginnen, die Sie protegieren. Wir werden jetzt genau hingucken.
Okay, some questions here from the audience, please.
Ich habe keine Frage, ich habe eine Anmerkung. Ich bin 70 Jahre alt, ich arbeite seit 53 Jahren, war vor 45 Jahren zum ersten Mal in Äthiopien, lebe teilweise in Äthiopien und in Berlin und mir wird das alles so negativ hier dargestellt. Wenn Sie wüssten, was ich alles erlebt habe an Entwicklung und ich war Chefin, ich war Lehrling, ich war alles. Und ich bin auch von Frau Strack-Zimmermann enttäuscht, dass sie am Anfang letztendlich nur kritisiert haben, die Situation, und nicht mit Lösungen kommen. Wirklich, mir ist das alles zu negativ hier und mir macht das keinen Spaß, wenn ich mir überlege, was wir alles aus unserem Arbeitsalltag erzählen könnten, was Frauen auf allen Ebenen leisten. Und das musste ich jetzt einfach mal loswerden.
Yes, of course. I mean, I think there are many accomplishments and we have had a laugh here and there, so it's not been all dull, I think. But we need of course to underline that there's a lot of work still to do and many topics we need to tackle. And I think this has been the focus. But of course, you're right. There are positive aspects as well. But let's hear from another person here in the audience.
Eine Antwort darf ich geben, Frau Wedekind. Ich habe übrigens heute den 8. Tag gehört und fand das sehr interessant, was Sie da gesagt haben. Das war das erste Positive. Zweite, das sehen Sie, wenn ich das so sagen darf, völlig falsch. Es gibt unglaublich viel Gutes, aber ich glaube, sich darauf auszuruhen, das war meine Intention. Es ist eben, unser Anspruch ist das eine, aber die Umsetzung entspricht nicht einem modernen Land, das wir sein könnten. Und ich habe Lösungsvorschläge, das würde jetzt den Rahmen sprengen, aber ich glaube, wir sollten schon den Finger in die Wunde legen, damit wir uns diesbezüglich weiterentwickeln. Und dass viel passiert ist in den letzten Jahren, ohne Zweifel. Also um das zu sagen, ja. Ich sitze ja auch hier, ich bin 63, insofern, ich habe auch einige Leichen pflastern meinen Weg, aber ich wollte nur sagen, dass das, wenn das negativ rübergekommen ist, ist es falsch, aber wir sollten nicht glauben, dass bei uns im Zentrum Europas, in Deutschland, viertgrößte Volkswirtschaft der Welt, alles wirklich toll ist. Der Herr, der gerade über die Messe sprach, ist ein Paradebeispiel dafür, dass es eben nicht so ist.
Ja, vielen Dank. So, ich glaube, hier ist noch eine Wortmeldung aus dem Publikum, bitte.
Well,
in English or German,
that's Stefan
however
Oswald
you...
speaking, BMZ. Vera, it's good to see you again. I have one question to you. And you made some remarks on, let's say, the setbacks on female development during the COVID crisis. Could you enlighten us with some ideas what we as the development partners community need to address on a priority to change that? And one remark to Mrs. Wedekind, we had a change of government in Tanzania because of, let's say, a previous president not believing in a certain pandemic. And now the female vice president came to power and really made a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Songwe.
Yes, please, now be brief. I'm good. I didn't see you, but I heard your voice and I immediately recognized you. No, so thank you, and good to know you in the audience as well. I think 3 things we could do immediately with COVID. I think the first thing is we, the Economic Commission for Africa, but many of us, BMZ and the others, we with finance ministers met and asked for this debt service suspension initiative. It is put in the pockets of African finance ministers somewhere in the order of $11 billion, which is essentially increasing fiscal space, and that means giving them a little bit more resources that they can spend. We're hoping that those resources can be spent to support those women who've lost their jobs, maybe with social protection programs, lasting social protection programs, job employment programs maybe can be put in place, some kinds of infrastructure programs can be put in place. You know, in Kenya, and I'm using many Kenyan examples, but that's because they're doing really well, and I could use Rwandan examples as well, Cape Verde. You know, they have a policy that of all the government budget, 30% of the government procurement budget should go to women. This is a fantastic policy because it immediately allows women to become job owners, to become small and medium enterprise managers of their own businesses, and begins to fund them. So I think with the kinds of resources that we have been able to put back into government's pockets, that's one thing that clearly can be done. We also worked to get this special drawing rights. Africa got 33.6 billion of the special drawing rights, again, creating a little bit more fiscal space. What can be done? Ensure that women have, you know, women spend a lot of their income on healthcare. 27 cents out of every dollar is spent on some kind of healthcare support. Can we create health insurance systems that help to, you know, support these women immediately and give them a floor? Because it's usually when there is a crisis, you know, then your health follows, and that's what keeps you deeper. And if we can sort of create a system that will help on the health sector side, that will be quite important. And then finally, we talked here about the power of the internet technology and how women can then, you know, grow and generate. We did an exercise where we interviewed a lot of small and medium enterprises in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, and other countries. And what came up is women who had access to the internet and who were doing their business already on the internet before the crisis did much better during the crisis. So clearly there is a resilience that gets built in to that process. So maybe working with those women to see how, one, we can, unfortunately on the continent, internet access is scarce, but it's very expensive. Can we bring down those costs and see what more we can do for that? I think those are some, you know, immediate examples. Of course, long-term is creating daycare centers and ensuring that, you know, we provide other kinds of insurance, health insurance, agriculture insurance. 80% of the rural women are in agriculture. Provide them with insurance for weather shocks and weather-related events. I think those are some of the things that resources can be put to, where clearly we have analysis that there's a net positive when we do that.
Thank you very much. We are running a bit over time, but we still have, I think, 2 contributions here that I would like to take in. Perhaps you can try to make it a bit snappy and also tell us to whom you would like to address your question.
Fantastic. My name is Mbali Mutsuneng, and I'm a Hertie student, as well as working for the World Economic Forum. So I'd like to ask three questions. So firstly, Dr. Mary Agnes, you spoke about the challenges that women face in the political space, and I was actually involved in national youth leadership politics in South Africa. I'd like to know, for the case of Germany, how do you ensure that young women are involved in politics? Because we're speaking about women, but what about the young professionals or young people that actually want to enter into politics? I see a lack of representation in that space. In terms of Dr. Anya, I really like the fact that there's a lot of focus on health data within the Gates Foundation. However, how are you using that data in order to ensure that women and girls can access healthcare services as well as education, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is obviously there's a surge now, especially in Western African countries. And so I'd like to hear a bit more about your initiatives in that space. And lastly, to Dr. Vera Songwe, you are quite an inspiration to a lot of young African women. And I'd like to know, what is the plan for ensuring that young women are able to capacitate themselves and also keep a hold of their jobs during this pandemic, because there is a crisis with women having a burden of additional responsibilities within this period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So 3 questions, 3 answers, but please try to be brief and to the point. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, do you want to start?
Wie Frauen in die Politik kommen,
Ja,
oder wie man das unterstützen
wie wir
kann.
das jetzt ganz konkret, how we can achieve this.
Die Frage ist nicht einfach zu beantworten. Ich glaube, es ist der Auftrag. Wir sind ja ein System in Deutschland, was geprägt ist von Parteien. Und das ist der Auftrag der Parteien ist, eben junge Frauen zu fördern. Wir haben in Deutschland eine Diskussion über Quoten. Ich weiß, es gibt Parteien, die machen das über Quoten. Ich gehöre zu einer liberalen Partei. Wir haben immer mit Quoten Probleme. Ich glaube aber, es muss eine Selbstverpflichtung geben, wo man sich darauf einlässt, dass wir eine bestimmte Anzahl Frauen haben müssen, um eben entsprechend, was gerade gesagt wurde, Frauen und Männer arbeiten einfach besser zusammen, um das zu unterstützen. Und ja, wir brauchen Role Models, weil das gerade gesagt wurde, aber man muss sie auch sehen. Und wenn 100 Role Models zusammen sind, ist es weniger wirkungsvoll, als wenn jede einzelne für sich wirkt. Ich persönlich arbeite sehr viel mit jungen Frauen zusammen und ich habe deutlich mehr Frauen, die in meinem Büro arbeiten, als Männer, weil ich das als großen Gewinn erachte.
Thank you. Mrs. Langbucher, health data.
Very, very brief. Yes, we do think that data is very important to bring up the invisible and to make sure we can identify the program. Of course, we are supporting many health care and specifically women's health focused programs. I'll just mention one, which is the Global Finance Facility, which is a very powerful, as we think, instrument that really focuses on scaling up access to health services, but also family planning, nutrition, all of the important things. I think the 2 most shocking data that I have seen recently is, as I said at the beginning, skyrocketing maternal death due to COVID, as well as unplanned pregnancies. And I think this is some of the focus areas where we really hope that leveraging an instrument like the Global Finance Facility can be very useful.
Thank you. Over to you, Mrs. Songwe.
Thank you. No, I'll be brief. I think we're doing 3 things. The first one that we're doing is we launched something called African Women Connect, and it's an internet platform where we're teaching women how to program Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, animation, and essentially it has provided a platform. To date, we've trained over 15,000 young girls between the age of 15 and 24 across the continent. And again, this is a little bit this comes in around networking. So it's, young girls in Ethiopia working with young girls in Cameroon, young girls in Burkina Faso working with young girls in Zimbabwe, creating new applications that are useful for them and their community. So keeping them in jobs, giving them jobs. The second thing we've done is something that we call the African Women's Impact Fund. And so we are looking for resources. And the idea here is to create women fund managers. On the continent, we only have somewhere between 2 and 3% of the fund managers on the continent are women. We want to create a lot more because we believe that when women manage funds, they can then on-lend to more women. We're looking for resources for this. We've found an amazing, fantastic lot of women that are willing and just waiting for those resources. And we hope that we can do that for them. And then finally, we've created something called the Young Economist Network, where we're working across all the universities to see how we can work with different universities in different countries to come up with policies that governments can take in those countries. We create a macro framework which we offer them, but then they can endogenize those macro frameworks and policies within their frameworks in the countries where they are, and we can provide additional advice. And that helps, I think, governments who are in search of policies reach out to their universities and see what are you doing that is more gender sensitive as a policy framework. And hopefully it's more implementable because it comes from your universities. So those are three very quick things that we're doing that are concrete, measurable, and hopefully will bear fruit.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I know time is too short again, and we will have now one last question, and then unfortunately we will close this. But here's our question again from the audience.
Thank you very much. My name is Bienvenue Anguille. I am the head of operation at Great Tech Capital Africa Foundation, and I have also my own company, Mobiang. It's not only a question, but a remark, because Mrs. Strack-Zimmerman, you said that everything begins also at home, how we are educated, so the role of the woman and the boys. But I think also it is about how it is also a question of politics. And so, you know, I've learned for a short time that from 194 countries, only 22 are led by women. I mean, it's it is a big gap. And we also know that some regions like the north of Europe is like Iceland, Norwegian, and so on and so forth. There are more women now in the government, in the policy, and some countries in Africa, like in Rwanda or Senegal, also have more women in the government, and we see also the development and the progress that those countries are made. So I think that the politics also have to do something to interest this profile, I mean woman, so that maybe we can have this role model, because it is obvious when we have someone like Angela Merkel, everybody knows, and it can also be a good model for a woman, and also a good model for the system in a whole. So it's just what I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. I think this is a great closing statement, even because it's not only about gender equality, it's, I think, even about female leadership, at least in some fields. And we would like to see more of this. I think we agree here. Time has been too short. I mean, there are many topics we touched. I'm glad. There are some more we could discuss, like ICT, the role of that, finance, how do we allocate the money to the different fields of action, positive examples, perhaps. We can talk about those next time. But for now, it is my role to say thank you. Thank you to you, ladies. It's been really a pleasure discussing with you. Thank you to you all here for listening. Thank you to GPI for your valuable cooperation in this. And thank you to everybody that joined us online and also participated actively. I wish you all a very nice evening still, and a safe way home tonight. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.